and 92.3 FM, streaming live at KYRS.org. It's May 21st, 2024, and it's noon. I'm Laura Ackerman. We have special guests today from the Inland Northwest Land Conservancy, Carol Corbin and Jonathan Teeters, and more on our guests in a moment.
And I'm Mike Peterson. The views we express do not necessarily represent those of the station. Highs around 62 today, then cooling and some rain on Wednesday and fairly cool until Memorial Day. And real briefly, as part of the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to protect America's natural wonders, honor the areas of cultural significance, this month Biden signed proclamations expanding the San Gabriel Mountains National Monument and the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument in California. That adds 120,000 acres of land. Also want to thank Chad Pritchard and Nick Zentner for coming on the show last week as part of the Geological Society of America meeting. Well, Jonathan and Carol of Inland Northwest Land Conservancy, which is part of the 50-year Expo 74 celebration on KYRS. Welcome to Earth Matters Now, Carol and Jonathan. Tell us about yourself.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us here. Good to be here. Happy Expo, almost, maybe. I'm Jonathan. I'm a board member with the Inland Northwest Land Conservancy, one of the new board members, and also fairly new to Spokane. Glad to be here. This is like my third summer, I think. But right now, I work at Empire Health Foundation. That's my day job. A little bit about me, what brought me out here. I'm a Vandal, so I played football at the University of Idaho many, many years ago, and have a degree in conservation biology and environmental sciences and things. And so I really kind of love this place. And I've also been a political operative and worked in policy and politics for many, many years. So just kind of wear many hats.
Did you grow up in Idaho?
No, I'm actually from the west side of the mountains there. I grew up in Kirkland, Washington.
Okay.
I always tell people I'm from where Costco. You think Costco first and Kirkland.
Well, my name is Carol Corbin. I'm the Director of Philanthropy and Communications for Inland Northwest Land Conservancy. I have been with the organization now for just over 4 years, and I have been in Spokane since 2005. I moved out here for what I thought would be about a 6-month gig before I got my real job and moved to my real place, and realized really quickly that this community is an amazing place to live. I discovered the access to the outdoors, doing all the things that I love to do, hiking, biking, running, camping, kayaking, all of those things within a 15-minute drive of this community, and, found a place with reasonable cost of living and access to the amenities of a big city, but, really kind of that small town feel. So I fell in love with this place really quickly. I had about a 12-year career with Recreational Equipment Incorporated, and through that was able to get really connected with the nonprofits that are here in the community that help support trails and access to nature and conservation. And that's how I ended up working for the Conservancy, because I saw an organization that was doing really good things to protect the way of life that I've really come to love since living in this community, and that's why I'm here today.
So it's kind of an extension of Expo in a way, what the Conservancy is doing and what you enjoy doing. Because Expo, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary, that was the world's first environmental fair. And now we have all of these conservation groups in Spokane that never existed during Expo.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that really surprises people about Spokane as a community is when you talk about Expo, we're the smallest city to have ever hosted a World's Fair. And the fact that World's Fair in the 70s was focused so much on environmentalism in kind of this tiny little pocket of the Inland Northwest, that kind of blows people's minds. And so I think that this is a great opportunity for us as a community to come together and say, hey, this is a part of the DNA of who Spokane is and really what this city has grown up around over the last 50 years. And, our organization started in 1991, and it was literally just a group of about a dozen people sitting at a kitchen table saying, somebody really should be considering the long-term protection of the nature and the access to the outdoors we have in this community, and what does that look like? And that's how we came to be.
Wow. So tell us a bit more about the Conservancy, how many staff and what you're doing right now.
Yeah, well, as I said, we were founded in 1991, so we've been in existence for over 30 years. Over that time, we've protected more than 27,000 acres in eastern Washington and North Idaho. So we work across the state border. We like to think that we work in more like ecosystems and watersheds than we do in geopolitical boundaries. And, the critters in the forest don't really know where that line is. So we work in both states. Of that 27,000 acres, that's about 125 miles of waterways and shorelines. So the work that we do is really centered around a love of nature. That is our number one core value, really caring for the natural world that we live in. We are a staff of 10 full-time staff members, and then we also work with, some contractors here and there to do some of the pockets of work that we do. I'm happy to get into the mechanisms about our work, but really what we do is work to protect the special places in our community that help support healthy water, clean air, habitat for animals, long-term homes for plants, really investing in that local nature.
I think too, you're probably going to get to sort of what attracted me to this organization as well.
Right.
I think I want to put in a plug for the Glantana Project. And I think one of the things that this organization does really well is, partners with others in the community to create perpetual opportunity, I think. And the Glantana Project, I can't quite rattle off all of the statistics off the top of my head, but it's one of the single largest conversions of private land into preserved trust land, conservation land in the state of Washington in many, many years, and maybe one of the largest and last of this size. And it's right on the Little Spokane River, and it's 1,000 contiguous acres.
That's amazing.
Form of family land and things like that. And I think the scale and scope of some of the things that we're able to do in this region is quite, it's worth mentioning,
So Glantana, is that the name of the family that's donating it?
That's a great question. So there's so much I could say here, and I don't want to dive down too deep of a rabbit hole. Actually, the term Glantana, as I understand it, comes from the Scottish, and it means something like land of 1,000 springs or land of many springs. So for anyone that's hiked along the Little Spokane River, and particularly in the Waikiki Springs Nature Preserve, which is a public preserve that we own and manage along the Little Spokane River, you're familiar with the springs that bubble up out of the hillside there along the Little Spokane River. Those springs are coming directly from the Spokane Valley Rathdrum Prairie Aquifer. So there's all of these gravels that were deposited by the Ice Age floods, and now we have this massive, surprisingly healthy aquifer for, what's going on with water globally. We are really fortunate to have this amazing water resource, and the aquifer bubbles out of the hillside there along the Little Spokane River, which creates this amazingly consistent, cool river space that's actually really ideal habitat for fish like salmon. And as we know, when the dams went in over 100 years ago, the salmon runs dried up, and now they don't happen anymore. But thanks to our work at Waikiki Springs, we've been able to partner with the Spokane tribe and learn more about the work that UCUT is doing in salmon reintroduction into the block zone.
Upper Columbia United Tribe.
Thank you, yes. All those acronyms,
it's
right?
It's easy to do it as conservationists. We rattle them off, yes.
Yes. And so the property that Jonathan's referring to is something of a legacy project for our organization. It is 1,000 acres along the Little Spokane River that our organization has had an eye on for at least 2 decades to say, this big chunk of land right here with 2 miles of shoreline of the Little Spokane River, actually 2 miles of river as it meanders through. This is such a prime place for conservation. But as you can imagine, oftentimes places that are prime for conservation are also prime for $1 million homes. What an amazing place to have a home. So our organization watched that land for years. And last year we had an opportunity to work with the family trust that owned that land and actually secure it for conservation. It's a project that's still very active in partnership with the Spokane tribe and Washington State Parks. And we'll be working with our community to ensure that permanent protection is in place.
So that means raising money.
Well, yes. Right now we're working toward that. We're also working to care for that land as as we do as stewards of the land to make sure that we're making it as healthy as we can for its future. Eventually, the plan is that the Spokane tribe will own a portion of it that's along the Little Spokane River, and Washington State Parks will own and manage the rest for the enjoyment of our community and to really fully connect the Waikiki Springs to Riverside State Park.
So can the public go down there, say, this summer and kayak down that stretch? Is that allowed yet?
Thank you for asking that, Mike. Not yet. Because we are a small organization, we have all of one staff member that's dedicated to really caring for and focusing on that place. We don't have the capacity to manage it for public access at this point. We will, however, eventually be hosting hikes that are on a, kind of an invite or registration only. But that's not going to be for a while yet, so don't get too excited. It really is a beautiful place, and we are doing our best to make sure that it's ready for public use, and that the animals who are already living there, that the trees and the plants and the ecosystems that are already existing up there can maintain that health and vitality even when people are interacting with the land.
Well, you mentioned that you work with the tribe and Upper Columbia United Tribes, and I know you work with other conservation groups and state parks. How about elected officials? And what kind of challenges are there in working with elected officials?
The last question is probably the best question. Unending, I think. The landscape is always changing. That's one area where I've spent a lot of my, professional life and a lot of time as an activist trying to figure it out and navigate it and things. Again, big fat caveat of being the newest board member to INLC. I think it's fair to say that one of the things that this organization is looking to do by bringing on new board members, new perspectives, is to really open up new opportunities to get the organization present and prevalent in that space that is also so important when we're starting to talk about, generational style projects in an area. Those don't just happen overnight, and, kind of everything between business and politics, kind of everything touches one of those at some point. Mm-hmm. And I think that, so it's absolutely necessary to learn how to navigate those spaces and places. I think every organization goes through sort of an arc of when they're ready to really do that. And it does seem that, part of what attracted me to INLC was kind of seeing that they seemed to be ready with the scale and scope of what they were doing to really have a use for some of the things that I thought I could add.
How's your experience at Empire Health? You're their policy director, right?
Yeah.
And how has that kind of helped you interact with the politics of things?
I would say first and foremost, right now I'm wearing my individual hat here while I'm talking. I'm not wearing my Empire Hat Health. But that said, that opportunity, that job, that working at Empire Health has given me an incredible privilege to sit in this space in this community to not only meet and learn so much about all of our community, but also specifically with the mission of recognizing and serving those who are most underrepresented or sort of left out of these tables and these places where generational decisions are made. I found that also, so wearing the responsibility of putting resources in the hands of those communities in a responsible way, I think, is also really opened my eyes to what's possible in this community. And I think it's one of the reasons why when we start really looking systematically at our region, there's just so much upside. Again, INLC, plug for INLC, they are an organization I think is really ready to use their position in this community to sort of open the doors for more folks to come in and have a good experience, right?
Right. Well, so generational is an interesting word. And, generationally ready, the board seems to be ready, you say, for a larger project like this 1,000 acres. But it also seems to be ready for the younger generation, a different generation. And you maybe represent that right now on the board. I know a few of your board members, and I've read the board's bio, and I know that you're the newest. And do you hope, is this an opening for a younger generation? And I think a lot of nonprofits, you're certainly not the only one, have to face this or deal with this. It's mostly a bunch of old white people for a lot of reasons in Spokane, and part of it is because they have the time, but part of it is because Spokane's at 86% white as well.
Yeah, 86% white. Obviously the historic roots of this place with all of the tribes who have always called this place home means that we scratch too deep and you immediately find diversity, as some places describe it. So I think that that's important to put out there. And then also, like myself personally, I try to be real careful about saying like I wear the hat for or I have the responsibility of. Right? I am younger, but I'm not young by any means. Like I'm not on the latest social medias and things like that. I have boundaries around that. Fortunately, after some hard-earned lessons. But I'm also, for example, I'm on the board of the Hunters of Color organization, which is a national 501c3 with the mission of creating more opportunities for people of color to be outside, sort of reclaiming heritage and spaces and sort of history and pastime and current enjoyment on the landscape. I think people don't care for what they don't know about. And part of the challenge we have in this generation is kind of creating those opportunities, those touch points for people to learn about things in different ways so they can find the one that they care about. And I think that's kind of what I do, what I look to do personally in my life, and is, I think, some of what INLC represents for me and the other things that I'm doing. And I think the board does seem, baby steps. I think that's a huge caveat, for every organization. There's so much change going on. But I think you have to be willing to create opportunities for change to happen before it can happen in many cases. Just a great opportunity here for Spokane. There's so much change happening.
Well, I want to continue this thread about board and staff, and maybe get your thoughts, Carol. And obviously it could be a sensitive or a great question. How does the board interact with the staff as far as what you see? Are they helpful, like Jonathan seems to be, or are they not there, or what would you wish that was happening that maybe isn't happening?
Well, recognizing that many of them may hear this. No, I kid. I feel like the board that we have right now is so incredibly professional and talented, and it's exciting to see new voices coming on that board with bringing a whole wealth of career experience and life experience and kind of their own backgrounds and their own stories, and being present with those things that they're bringing to the table and being able to effectively speak to, here's where I'm coming from and why I believe in conservation. And to have the level of professionalism and expertise and just strategic thought that we have on our board, I think situates our organization very well to be kind of on the cutting edge of conservation for the future of our community. I was just talking with a board member the other day, and she shared that she feels like the next 10 years in this community are going to be so critical. Since COVID, we've seen just this blossoming of growth in our region. And I totally see why. This is an amazing place to live, and it was a secret for so long. It's not a secret anymore.
And it's not cheap anymore.
Right. So with property values going up, conservation isn't as appealing to some landowners as it may be, because they can sell their land to a developer and make so much more. But the need for conservation is ramping up just as rapidly, if not more so, than our property values, right? So the importance of keeping spaces protected for the future, but doing that in a strategic way that allows us as a relatively small organization to utilize our resources in the best possible way without our board going through the strategic thinking that it takes to drive that work. We could easily just be kind of all over the map and doing good work, but not doing the best work that we could with the resources we have.
Well, boards are interesting creatures. I mean, I have been on lots of boards. Mike's been on lots of boards, and we both have our ideas of what a good board is and what isn't. And, you always hear about some slacker boards and slackers on board. So that's a big challenge. And also, when you look at books, there's a lot of books for boards. Right? How to have an effective board, blah, 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 blah. I mean, there's almost as many books on how to be a good board as there are diet books. And so that says something to me about the challenges of being on a board. And we have a staff person and a board person, and like, what do you think is really crucial? Because there's a lot of conflict sometimes between boards and staff. What do you think is crucial in terms of just really working together? Because I think you all believe in the mission and your goal. What's really important in interacting with each other? I mean, you mentioned strategy. Board says strategy, but there's also just ways of being and ways of talking to each other and being open-minded and transparent. Any comments? I know that's a lot to say.
It is a mouthful.
It is.
Jonathan, I'm sure you have your thoughts on this, but I think that part of it is staying focused on the mission of the organization. So our mission is to conserve, care for, and connect with lands and waters essential to life in the inland Northwest. And, within that, we have our core values, we have our organizational vision, and we've done a lot of intentional work over the last several years of building language around that mission and around those core values, so that regardless of what body of work we're talking about, we're keeping that central focus. So the people who are on our board because they believe in that mission. So even when there's a disagreement about, well, I think we should do it this way, but I think we should do it this way, we have that shared vision. We have that shared direction so that we know we can navigate that disagreement or that discrepancy to find the best possible outcome for conservation.
I'm pretty new to this specific board, so I can't, make any broad sweeping statements other than great management helps. Organizational leadership from the top to the bottom is really important to having a board that understands its role and how it is a resource for the team that's doing the work, not necessarily the other way around. I think it's really helpful to set good expectations about what's expected of the board and just keep those front and center in terms of sort of the culture and the identity of the entity. Right? I joined this board because I was looking specifically for one that wasn't going to be super hands-on and need me to be investing tons and tons of time and really, leading and doing all the time, building the organization, that I could come and really just add my expertise and contribute to the mission however I could best do that. And I think that puts me in a position where I can trust the staff to just do the work, because I know I'm not here to do it, that's for sure. So I'm here to provide, the best insight I can and do what I can to contribute to help make sure that the voices and the perspectives that I bring with me are worked in there. But otherwise, it's up to the staff. This organization is more mature than other organizations I am a part of or have been a part of. And so that's clearly not an all-the-time case.
Yeah. Well, thanks about talking about the board-staff relationship there. It's a critical thing. I can imagine, though, like when you're sitting down for your once or twice a year get-together, let's have the map out and do this strategic plan of where are we going to go protect next or what needs it. Talk about how that goes. I've known Chris DeForest for a long time, and I know there's wildlife corridors, and a lot of them are along waterways. That makes sense. Talk about how that's looking right now, what your future is going to be, what your priorities are.
I have about half a dozen different answers that kind of sprang to my mind, so I'm going to try to sort them out for you. First of all, we are so fortunate to have Chris DeForest on our team. He was the first paid employee for the organization, and he is currently working as our senior conservationist, and he is a master of creating legal easements, legal conservation easements with private landowners. He has done amazing work over the years, and it's been so exciting to be part of the team for the last 4 years and see relationships that he started building in the 90s that are now coming to fruition in just incredible land protection projects that are being completed. It can take landowners, obviously, sometimes decades to really think through and work through that process of what they want the future of their land to look like. But Mike, in answer to your question, another one of our core values is discernment. And that really means that we utilize the best available science and research and data to make the conservation decisions that we make. Our conservation director, Mike Crabtree, has spent a lot of time working with mapping software and using different data layers whether it's migration corridors or, aquifer recharge places, intact forests, overlaying those data layers with one another to find kind of the hot spots that jump out, the places that are really vital to the ecosystems in the inland Northwest. And then being strategic about getting to know landowners in those places to say, hey, did you know that this piece of land that you own, that you live on, is so important to our aquifer because, or, is so important to elk migration because. That gives us, and when we sit down with our board and say, what's next? What projects are we pursuing next? What areas do we want to work in next? We have a data and science-driven answer to that question instead of just, we think we maybe could go work over there, or what about here? We have a clear answer with data to support why that's where we're putting our efforts.
I think that's one of the many things. Like, I did my due diligence when I was looking at how I wanted to get involved in this space specifically. And I chose the environmental space because of my background with my life in Alaska, doing a lot of environmental activism, and then also, being a vandal and graduating from the school down there with degrees in conservation biology and whatnot. And I think that's one of the other things I saw is that this organization had both sort of like the public-facing engagement aspect of things, but also had behind it what really turns my gears, which is some of the nerdy science and the GIS and the data and analytics that gives you answers on things, right? And conservation science was always about that. And so I wanted to come so that I could get back into conservation space and just flex those muscles and feel, look at GIS maps and talk about this area and get to know it through that lens. And I came and saw the work they were doing, and it's just, it's well ahead of sort of the pace that it probably should be at, and I think is just really kicking butt, and it's a great use of time and really makes the job a lot easier to support the mission because there are fewer questions, and it's more about like, here's how we know this is the right thing to do, and also built on years and years of relationships too. This isn't just, these aren't just financial transactions, these are relational transactions.
Right. I think Chris has really brought that. I mean, I've known Chris too, and he's really brought that to the organization. And also, just listening to you, you get this sense that you're not a land conservancy that's just buying up land left and right to conserve it because it's going to be developed. And that is a strategy. I mean, if I were personally really wealthy, I'd probably just do that as a strategy and then deal with it afterwards. But it's a little bit different when you're an NGO. I mean, because I could call you up, because I have a 12-acre farm, I could call you up and say, okay, I want you to buy 5 acres of my farm and conserve it. I mean, and you're probably going to say, okay, well, let's just step back a little bit where you're not going to get out a checkbook. And so, I mean, what is the process of that? Because some people might be a little upset with you if they offer your land, and there may be occasions where you're not that interested in it. So what's going on there?
I would love to say that we are able to respond in the positive to everyone who knocks on our door and says, I have this piece of land, or there's this piece of land next to me that just went up for sale. Yes, in a perfect world, we would have billions of dollars and we would just make that happen, but that's not the reality of the situation. So a lot of people don't fully understand the ways that our organization works to protect land. So the way that I break it out is we have essentially 3 tools in our conservation toolkit. The first one is the conservation easement, and that is a permanent legal agreement that we construct with a willing landowner. We only work with willing landowners to put a permanent legal agreement on their land in which our organization holds the development rights to that land in perpetuity. In other words, the landowner says, I am giving up the right to develop this land. I'm putting it with your organization, with our organization, to hold in perpetuity, to monitor, to care for, to ensure that those legal requirements are upheld in perpetuity. And now oftentimes the landowner will get a great tax benefit for that, or, something like that. But the important thing to remember is that legal agreement follows the land and not the landowner. So regardless of who owns that land in the future, if they sell it or if it goes to an heir, we will always have the legal responsibility of making sure that that land is never developed. That's the most common tool that we've used, and we've used that ever since our founding in 1991. Because of that, it's been fairly quiet work because it's our organization working with a private landowner, their attorneys, to draft up these agreements and then fulfill the obligations of those agreements in perpetuity. The second tool that we use is partner projects, and this one really speaks to our value of collaboration, working with other organizations in the community. We know that the pace of the need of conservation in this community is far beyond what we can ever achieve by ourselves. So it's really important for us to work with other conservation-minded organizations, with elected officials, with planners, community planners, city, county planners, to make sure that we're all working towards the best conservation outcomes in our region that we can have. And so that partner project tool is when we see an opportunity for land protection, but we're not the best people to do it. We're not the best organization to do it. In that instance, because of 30 years of relationship building, we may have access to a landowner who wants to see their land conserved, but they just don't know the right people or the right organization. We can come to the table and say, hey, conservation-minded landowner, here is a conservation-minded land buyer that might be interested in purchasing your land for this conservation project or that conservation project. And our organization has seen some really big wins in utilizing partnerships that we've built over the years. And then the third tool that we use, the one that you mentioned, Laura, is buying land outright. It's the most expensive. It's the most labor-intensive. It's the most stressful. So it's the one that we use the least often. And when we do use it, it's with the idea that we will be a bridge owner for the land. We don't have robust mechanisms in place for owning and managing land in the long term. So our preference is to be nimble, to be able to buy the land when the seller is ready to sell the land, but then to be able to turn over ownership and management of that land to someone like state parks or county parks who, land management is what they do. So those are the three different tools in our toolbox, the three mechanisms that we use and kind of how we make those decisions. Did that answer your question? That was a very long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we'll bring this up. We're going to take a very short station break, and then we'll keep talking about these three different mechanisms. You're listening to Earth Matters Now on KYRS Medical Lake, Spokane, 88.1 and 92.3 FM, and thanks for listening in to Earth Matters Now. We're interviewing the Inland Northwest Land Conservancy, Carol and Jonathan.
So I know just in my conservation work in Spokane, with Mike too, where we used to work and other places, and people make a lot of assumptions about environmental groups that we all just buy land, and or people call up and it's like, I have a problem and you need to fix it. And I'm sure that's really a challenge. I don't know how much it is for a land conservancy, but if let's just say that you come out to my property and you decide that it's a really wonderful piece of land and it needs to be conserved in some way. So it's not necessarily just like, I'm going to sign over the deed to you. I mean, yes, I have to, that is certainly a part of it, but there's some financial stuff that's involved in here on your end. And I don't think a lot of people understand that.
Yeah, the price tag that can come with conservation can be pretty high. So, let's say you owned, 300 acres on Mount Spokane, and it's old growth forest, and there's water flowing through it, and the moose move through there, and it's just this prime place for conservation. That's the start of a pretty intensive process of really understanding what is on that land, what it means for the natural world, for our community. We would work with the landowner to understand, is this something where you would like to donate the conservation rights of this land to us as an organization? Or, do we need to be looking for a mechanism that would purchase those rights? Then it would go through, it goes through our land protection committee to say, is this, is it in alignment with our priorities? Is it in one of our project areas? Does it meet our acreage criteria? Does it have water resources? Does it have forests? So there's a lot of these kind of qualifiers that it has to pass through before we say, yes, this is a project we're going to pursue. So it goes through all of the data filters, it kind of goes through our algorithm to say, is it worth the time and resources we put into it? And that kind of kicks off. And again, this is a process that can sometimes take years, depending on what the landowner's priorities are and how comfortable they are with the process, and, you know, how quickly their attorney responds to contact and all of those good things.
What are some of the main reasons why people want to donate their land? Sometimes I think it's a little more surprising. It may not just be about conservation.
I would imagine you hear a lot of the good ones. And you know, one of the first times I came together with all of the INLC folks at the end of the year party last year, and there was some folks there who were both part of the Glentana project, and then there were some other folks there. And to your point, didn't necessarily strike me as conservationists out of the gate, but yet they were in a room full of folks who struck me as conservationists. And I think just a history and a place is something that is really worth preserving. I think folks get to that end thought different ways. And, you know, leaving space for folks who use the land to figure out how they can still kind of keep some roots in a space and protect a lot of it is important. And I think the flexibility of easements and the package of deals that we just talked about allows for folks to come to the table recognizing that we're not necessarily like running them off their property and severing ties. This is about really sort of engendering these ties forever, however that might look, which is why it takes a long time, but which is also why the durability of these things is so amazing.
I've heard some people say, I want to leave this land to conservation because I don't want my kids arguing over it. Or I don't want one child will develop and one won't. I mean, it's pretty honest for parents to say that.
And you know, we definitely hear that from time to time. And we hear other, you know, I think the most common answer is that people love the land. And to Jonathan's point, the beauty of the conservation work that we do is that it brings together such a diverse set of people, because one of the seemingly few things that we can agree on these days is that nature is important, is that forests are important and clean water is important. And so there's this unifying idea behind conservation. So a lot of the people that are interested in doing it are doing it because they love nature, because they love the land. You know, we've definitely heard those stories of, I don't want my kids fighting over it, or, you know, those stories, which we won't talk about, but it does happen. But there's the more kind of micro stories. I think of a landowner on an easement that we worked with along the Coeur d'Alene River. And as you probably know, the Coeur d'Alene River has a ton of legacy mining waste. It's a super fun cleanup site. We've done a handful of land protection projects along that corridor to allow the restoration partnership to come in and clean up and, you know, remediate those areas. But one of the really sad outcomes of that pollution is migratory birds. When they feed on the plants at the bottom of the river, they die from heavy metal poisoning. And one of the landowners that we worked with along the river, he'd thought about an easement and kind of was on the fence, and finally one day he called and said, you know, I don't want to see another dead swan on my property. And that was just, you know, that like gets you in the feels, right? Because people can see the impact that humans have on the environment, and they say, hey, I want to do what I can to make this better and to make a brighter, more sustainable future for my community.
I'm wondering, because I'm part of a group called Spokane Urban Nature, and we've been focused on natural areas, in particular something called the Thorpe property, which is in Hangman Valley, Latah Valley. I'm wondering if the Land Conservancy ever works with state agencies like the Department of Natural Resources, who owns that property. And I should mention half of the DNR is focused on protecting and managing, and the other half wants to turn it over for development of, in theory, low-income housing, although there wouldn't be low-income housing on Thorpe property. I'm wondering if you've had an opportunity to work with the state DNR, or what your experience has been, or if you work at all with state agencies.
So we do work with state agencies. Our biggest project right now, the Glentana project that we were talking about earlier, is Washington State Parks is extremely integral in that project. We do work with other state agencies from time to time, and it's something we are absolutely open to. So I'm not speaking specifically about the Thorpe property because I don't want to stick my foot in that without our conservation director here to be able to speak to that. Yes, we do. As part of our collaboration, we do really integrate with state agencies as much as we can. They have powerful mechanisms to do land protection, trust land transfers and things like that. So they're good friends, and we try to keep them that way.
I think you bring up an interesting point, and that is the challenge that we have in our region of responding swiftly to, obviously, which is, the quality of life issues around housing, access to housing and enough housing, and this, the seeming pressure that puts on the resources we have to preserve and kind of keep our quality of life, in other aspects around here. And it is perhaps one of the more complex challenges out there. And I think the role that I play in philanthropy is also sometimes up in the mix with the private-ish space of things, and finding creative ways to make these things happen. I think that's what I think that we're going to be facing a lot more of is how to really adapt in creative ways that weren't seen when laws were written or when rules were created, because things are changing so quickly and we have to change, which requires really relational approaches to things. I think, which gets back to the root of kind of INLC and how this whole business works, but also across the community. I think you're seeing a lot of entities really recognize that this is a time for doubling down on the relational aspects of things, because trust is going to get us a lot further in some of these times coming up than necessarily, other things.
Divisiveness, yeah. And non-humans need homes too. And that is a huge challenge. We're seeing that more and more. Humans need homes, non-humans need home. But the educational aspect of that was, preserving land the way that you are doing it for generations and generations. But I would imagine that needs a lot of education for people to understand the importance of that. And for the example the KYRS Carol is I'm a landowner and I didn't realize that this was a really important way for elk to get from one place to the next place. And just educating humans about not only the necessity of diversity in nature, but that it's really important for human lives to have that kind of diversity, and that there's a lot of urban neighborhoods that don't have the kind of nature that they should have because they have traditionally been poor or they've been neighborhoods of color. So I think a lot of those things are all tied in, and tell me what you think about that.
Well, I think the concept of urban wildlife, urban nature, and even this concept that folks are paying a lot of money for rewilding therapy, things like that. Urban wildlife is everywhere, and I think that part of our challenge collectively is to figure out how do we create those opportunities to reconnect, and it's almost like reconnecting with lost values and lost ways of life. It's just in my generation, the social media generation, I've seen it almost come full circle back to where we're like, flip phones it is, which is a quick turn in social evolution. But I think part and parcel with that is recognizing that we need reasons to connect with the areas around us. And that is where partnerships come in so strongly with the work that we do. It's one thing to preserve a piece of property, but then to sustainably create value from it that is not just in looking at it is the challenge that I think gets you into generational discussions, gets you into educating people on the importance of knowing why it is there and what it's capable of. Landscapes are also meant to be lived on. I think that is one thing that the first people, the people that were here long before us taught us, just in through watching them, is landscapes are meant to be lived on. Not just looked at. And so I think that aspect of creating an interface with nature is really critical, and it's it starts with being able to have the piece of property to think about how could we best engage with this piece of property, which is why the trust has to be there to sort of preserve it in the first place, and then listen to partners and engage with the community and have the networks that will allow us to figure out, now how do we create more love for this? Like, how do we layer love on this property?
Mm-hmm. So do you have ways? Do you have a strategy for layering love on the property?
That's really part of the strategic work that we're doing right now. Our 3 program areas are Conserve, Care For, and Connect. And in my mind, that type of work really falls under the Connect program. So helping people find ways to understand the true importance of nature. It's difficult because our brains are so, just wired to be in the moment and immediate and not necessarily thinking about what our aquifer is going to look like in 100 years or 1,000 years. Our brains just don't work that way. So, Laura, you referenced that educational process to help people understand the value of land outside of economic value. There's been a lot of work of late to help people realize the economy of conservation and how it makes financial sense. But it's not just about the economy, right? It's about this quality of life. It's about the fact that we as humans are part of the natural world, and we've so much lost touch with that casting the vision of here's why this forever work is so important, that is difficult, and it's the long game, and it's why we tell the types of stories that we do in the ways that we do, that we can help people see themselves as part of an environment, as part of a natural world, and not someone sitting on the outside and observing. You are part of the natural world here in this community, and what are you going to do about that? How are you going to care for the world around you? It represents a cultural shift. It represents a shift in our community conversations. It represents individual shifts in our own minds. They're ones that I work on all the time. When recycle something instead of throwing it away, or I don't need that new thing to take up space in my house. There's a lot of layers to that, and we as an organization are still working to figure out, similar to our data approach on where to conserve land, is what's the right approach to helping to create that cultural change.
Where do you two recreate? I mean, I didn't even use the word recreate. It's just, where do you really enjoy being in nature in this area?
I'm a fly fisherman.
Uh-huh.
So I feel very lucky to be able to go fly fishing after work in the Spokane River and catch fish when you're legally allowed to catch fish. I'm also a turkey hunter and a hunter, deer hunter. So kind of everywhere around here is game for me. And oddly, that's actually what kind of really connected me to INLW was when I heard about the Glentana project. I'm working with Hunters of Color, and I was like, as a board member for Hunters of Color, I should maybe try and create a partnership with this entity that has access to private property that ordinarily people of color wouldn't get, or would have to go, sort of wrestle on public property with things. And I think those are for me, that was a creative opportunity to kind of link up an opportunity with a resource. And I think so. It's all over the place, really, and that's why we have to think about this in terms of saving chunks as well, not just small little pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Carol,
go ahead, Carol.
Boy, that's a hard question. Right now, I live closest to Palisades Park, and so that's a good default for me. It's kind of on my way to and from work and to and from my son's school. But then, I think, but I also really love the Dishman Hills, and there's that great spot on a peak, and the huckleberries on Mount Spokane in June and July. It's so hard to pick. And again, that's just why I love this place.
You don't have to pick.
I don't have to pick, exactly. There's all of these different places I could go. So, I would probably have to say that my Dishman Hills, that's my number one, but boy, there's a lot of close seconds in there.
We're going to be talking to Ruth Gifford of Dishman Hills in 2 weeks on Tuesday.
That's great. I so appreciate the work that they do, and that place is just amazing.
I think just to kind of circle back on that, I've been privileged to know some folks out here that own our old-time ranchers or multi-generational ranchers, and so just kind of through going to business school and meeting some random folks from here, I know what it's like now to have friends that have big chunks of property that I can go recreate on. And that difference between having some space that is kind of underdeveloped or not overused, we'll say, and then going and recreating on public property sometimes, it's very clear to me, like, oh yeah, okay, so like there is still space out here. And that's, I think, one of the things too about the approach that INLC has of working with landowners directly to try to take some of those chunks that are still available, the way more or less working landscapes or intact landscapes, and make them available. Like, people after me will need to have that experience of like, oh, so this is what it was like before, you know. And when you fly into this area, you can see almost every open space that is protected, surrounded now by houses or other development. Mm-hmm. And that sort of pocketed landscape is going to be what's left if we don't kind of continue to look for these opportunities to connect landscapes and ramp things up and leverage partnerships and whatnot.
I wonder if I'm thinking of a corridor that runs from North Spokane down through East Central, and it's called the North Spokane Corridor, and it's a corridor for cars that's being built. But I'm also looking at it as a potential corridor that not all kinds of wildlife is going to use, for sure, but some wildlife, birds, pollinators, bugs, all sorts of, and small critters like
coyotes
and gophers. But those two neighborhoods, Hilliard and East Central, are like our poorest. They have the most people of color. They've been underserved with natural areas for years. I'm not sure that the North Spokane Corridor has much potential as a natural area, although there's a nice bike path. But is there any role, do you think, that the Land Conservancy could have to helping, replant, repair that huge corridor that's multiple miles long? I'm involved in planting ponderosa pine along there with Spokane ponderosa, but those aren't great pollinator plants, of course. Birds like trees. But I just wonder what the potential of turning that also into some kinds of wildlife corridor, because it's going to be publicly owned, and at night at least it'll probably be fairly quiet.
I love that vision. And I will say, I think for where our organization is right now, taking on a project like that would probably be scope creep. Quite honestly, so much of our resources right now are in protecting those large swath, already intact natural spaces. But with that being said, there are other organizations, Spokane Urban Forestry, the Lands Council. There are other organizations that are really focused on that more urban setting. What does it look like to create these little pockets of natural environment within the urban setting? I think it's critical work, and I talk to members and supporters of ours all the time that really have a heart for that work, that, want to plant more trees in the city and that are creating these little pollinator gardens in the tiny pocket of backyard that they have at home. I would love to see that coalesce as a bigger movement or a bigger effort on behalf of our community. I don't know that we're the organization that's best positioned to lead that type of work, though.
And from a sort of a policy and politics perspective, and as a political organizer and whatnot, I think that it's really important to exactly what you said, Carol. And in movement building, it's always important to have a contrast. And so I think that in the community that we are working in together, it's great to be able to have intact spaces that are larger to show folks, here's what things used to be. This is why it's so important that and now you shift back and reflect on protect or preserve or restore what's possible here. And I think, when you look at this as a narrative for our region that we're trying to build, you can't have, peanut butter without jelly, so to speak. And I think that you can't have something sort of idyllic or something for folks to aspire to, whatever level that might be at. And so even for some of these neighborhoods that have been underinvested or disinvested or, kind of bulldozed in some cases, having places and partners like INLC allows those folks access to something to look towards and to feel like there's an opportunity. I think that there's potential. And even if it's in a urban space, we're all going to be in this together for this region, and we all have to kind of like row the same boat, I think.
Yeah, that's really kind of a hopeful, response, like you said. I think a lot of people need to feel some hope in this world. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of stuff that's going on. We just have a couple minutes left. Tell us about, where listeners can find out more information, what upcoming events you have, and The Glentana project, that's really interesting. How much, I mean, if people want to donate to that, just give us a little more information, please.
Sure. So all of those resources are available on our website, and that website is inlandnwland.org. You can also check out our social media. Our handle is inlandnwland.org. We're primarily on Facebook and Instagram. Would love to have some people visit our website. There is an events page on that website that talks about the hikes and the stewardship projects that we do. We have a fantastic crew of about a dozen volunteer hike docents that are well versed in the work that we do in the community and lead hikes on areas in which we've been instrumental in doing land protection. So in the Rimrock to Riverside areas, Palisades, in the Waikiki Springs area, in the Salty Uplands area. So talking about the work we do, educating people about the natural environment. So you mentioned Chad Pritchard. He's one of our go-to experts for partnering on co-leading some of those hikes. Cool. And we have a handful of experts in, geology, in flowers, in natural plants, birds, all of those things. So those guided hikes are really educational. We also do stewardship projects this time of year. So our stewardship manager takes volunteers out to do forest management projects, tree plantings, things like that. All of those will be available on the events page of our website, inlandnwland.org. There's also a page dedicated specifically to the Glentana project, and you can find that under the Where We Work tab. You can take a look at the latest updates and how our community can get involved, and that's the spot.
And you can donate there if you want.
You can donate there. You can walk up and hand me a check with our name on it.
Just to put a very fine point on that, we are in the middle of a capital campaign to fundraise for that Glentana project, and really, for all the high net worth individuals out there listening to this right now that want to be part of preserving a very huge intact space for generations, check us out. Can help us get well on our way to being that bridge that we spoke of between sort of future, ownership by the Spokane tribe and Washington State Parks, and what it took to hold this together and get it to where it is now. So
we'd love your support. We look forward to that, to being completed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's such a great project. Well, good work. Well, Carol Corbin and Jonathan Teeters of the Inland Northwest Land Conservancy, thank you so much for being on our show. And we look forward to going out on the Glentana project in a few years and maybe even floating by it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Join us next week. Tanya Reardon's going to be here from Save Our Wild Salmon.
And that's going to do it for Earth Matters Now on Community Radio, KYRS Medical Lake Spokane, 88.1, 92.3 FM. We'll hope to hear you all next week, or you'll hear us. Thanks a lot.
Senior politics writer at Salon.com, who discusses the New York hush money trial of former President Donald Trump and how his contempt for women is linked to his administration's misogynist policies. But first we begin with a summary of some of the week's underreported news stories.
A year ago, the Biden administration laid out the red carpet for a state visit by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Yet, during the visit last June, an Indian intelligence officer was giving orders to hire a hit team to assassinate a leading Sikh activist, Gurpatwan Singh Panan, at his home in New York. The intelligence agent has been involved in several plots to murder Sikh dissidents in both Canada and the U.S. The assassination plot was foiled by U.S. authorities. The Washington Post reports that a U.S. investigation of that plot revealed it was approved by India's Director of Intelligence, Samat Goyal, who later resigned. At the time, Goyal was under intense pressure to eliminate the perceived threat of Sikh extremism overseas. A similar plot in Canada last June resulted in the murder of Sikh nationalist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in British Columbia. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau accused India of complicity in the killing and expelled India's spy agency station chief. Under